Good evening, everybody. Coast to Coast podcast coming at you live. I guess I shouldn't say evening because you might not be watching us live. And even if you're not, we still appreciate you being here. This is the Coast to Coast podcast brought to you by Congruity and Johnny T-Shirt here on InsideCarolina.com. I'm your host, Joey Powell. With me, as always, Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran. Fellas, appreciate you being here. And I guess first things first, let's get all over it. Tar Heels got a win that they absolutely had to have. I want to caveat all of this and use an old Roy Williams-ism. North Carolina was more gifted than LaSalle, but considering the way this podcast went last week and the way our conversations went, in the post game after the Georgia Tech game, I don't think North Carolina is in any position to be selective over what kind of wins they get, and so either way, you've got the Tar Heels knocking off LaSalle at home, 93-67. First things first, Sean. I'll hit you. I'll hit you with it just right out of the gate. Biggest positive from the Tar Heels win over LaSalle yesterday in the Smith Center.
Biggest positive. Every player on the team had a offensive rating over 100. So we talked about last week. This would ideally be a get right game for everybody to get their confidence up going into a very important week. And I think, despite maybe a rough first few minutes, it certainly did from the starters on down to the bench. Especially, I think this is probably the starting lineup we're going to see with Drake Powell and Lubin in at the 4 and the 5. But we talked a lot about Cade Tyson last week. Obviously, his shooting was really important for him to see the ball go through the net, but also to get everybody just in a positive mood. I think both offensively and defensively. 10 threes, so the most threes they'd hit in quite a while. I know the percentage wasn't stellar, but still seeing the ball go through the net for RJ on 2 threes. Elliot Cadeau with assists, minimizing the turnovers. And then defensively, obviously this goes to the opponent, but their second best points per possession defensive game. But I think in that you're able to see some things or areas of focus, most likely that they've been working on through the week. So it did seem there is more connectivity across both the offensive and defensive ends.
Yeah, I agree with all that wholeheartedly. Sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button so I could throw it to Sherrell. Sherrell, same question, man. What was your biggest positive after seeing the Tar Heels dismantle LaSalle yesterday in the Smith Center?
That they got to win. Honestly, like you said, they're at the point where you can't look down on a team and overlook them. You have to come out and kind of play your hardest. And I feel like in that first 5 minutes, it was a little bit of here we go again. They got down 5, and then it was 8-2 or 8-3, and then they kind of picked it up from there. So just the fact they were able to not get down by double digits and then find their way back and then kind of comfortably win. The free throws were not great, but just the fact, like Sean said, everyone contributed, and then you had some guys like Van Lubin. He got a couple, touches in the post. That's something that everyone has asked for. I think it's something Hubert Davis said. He talked about with the team that they need to get those guys a little bit more. So I just liked the pacing of the game, the way that after those first 5 or 6 minutes they attacked and kept attacking, even though they were missing all the free throws. They kept getting to the free throw line and putting the team in foul trouble, and that's kind of the recipe for this team. So just the fact that they won and that there was some tempo and there was that attacking to the basket, I thought were the biggest positives.
Yeah, would agree with that as well. And I think North Carolina did what they were supposed to do in the game against LaSalle. And I think earlier this season, especially hyper recently, that has not been the thing. They have not done what they were supposed to do. You go just back a week to the Georgia Tech game, and they struggled with what seemed like basic things. Sherrell, you alluded to it a little bit. I know that we are your favorite podcast, and we did talk last week, specifically Sean Moran, our guy. That's right, you're getting the Corey Alexander treatment really early. Sean Moran made mention last week that North Carolina had to find ways to work through the post. I think Rob even may have said it on the post game. But we talked about on this show that North Carolina had to find ways to utilize the post to at least give those guys opportunities to score, but also to make defenses more honest. Sherrell, we saw that yesterday, and you mentioned Van Allen Lubin by name, but we also saw James Brown getting some real entry passes, and I kind of I scratch my head like our pets' heads falling off because we're not used to seeing North Carolina throw post entries, and we saw multiple possessions where North Carolina was very deliberate in getting the ball into the post, whether it was low post or high post. Either way, they were going to a big man. I wonder if you might be able to give a little bit more color as to why that's so important for this North Carolina offense, Sherrell.
I think Rob made a point. He made a football analogy in that when you can make a team one-dimensional, when you can either make them run all the time or pass all the time, it's a lot easier to play defense. And that's what was happening with the Carolina offense in that it was essentially a high ball screen, and then guys would try to get to the basket, and if they couldn't, they would kick it back out to the top of the key, set another high ball screen. If they could get to the basket, then they would. If they couldn't, kick it out. You just do that for 35 seconds, and then someone hoists up a shot. So when there's no threat, you don't have to defend anything. So at least now there is tape, even against a team that's not as gifted as UNC, of them giving the ball to Van Allen Lubin and letting him take two dribbles and throw a hook over his shoulder. There's tape of it now, and I think that's the biggest thing. Is just like you said, the threat of it, and that's a good thing for UNC. Again, when you're going against a one-dimensional team, it's just so easy to defend. So I think that's going to be key in their two games coming up next week, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But the fact that it was established is a good thing, and you could tell it was a concerted effort. It wasn't just like, oh, James Brown happened to get the ball in the situation. Like, no, there were plays called, and there was an emphasis on getting the ball inside.
And to those guys' credit, a majority of them were finishing the way they were supposed to. Like they were playing like bigs when they got those entry passes. They were getting the ball right up at the rim and making high percentage shots, whether it's layups or little dump ins or what have you. Sean, I want you to see if you might be able to even take Sherrill's point a little bit farther. I see different guys contributing in the post yesterday, and I don't think that Jalen Washington was. I figure out how I want to say this. Jalen Washington, I think, at times this year has made things a little more difficult for himself than he needed to. He did have a great run out yesterday and got hit on the break and finished at the rim, but he didn't get a ton of playing time yesterday. But aside from him, most of the bigs, when they were getting the ball in the paint, were going up strong and getting good looks at it, if not offensive rebounds. Do you feel like that maybe North Carolina stumbled onto something, or is that just a byproduct of LaSalle being LaSalle?
I think a little of both. LaSalle being LaSalle, but at the same time, in terms of the post entries, I think you're also seeing. I think we probably 2 episodes ago. You got to give the bigs the ball where they can do damage, and so often I think the guards have been getting it to them. Maybe they need one more dribble than they're used to, or maybe there's a little bit of a crowd, and now they need to do a little bit more than they can do. And I think this time you saw them getting the baskets, straight line drives hard, after the pick and roll, diving hard to the rim. Elliot Cadeau, threading the needle. So they were getting the ball in positions to score at a high level, which you see by that overall team. I think 72% from 2-point yesterday. So I think it was, to your point, a focus on getting the ball in the post to once again make sure it's not just the three guards that everybody's worried about, but also the passes that were made and the positions where the ball was caught. It was eliminating difficult catches in traffic or difficult finishes with maybe two or three guys around you. And obviously this week with the two teams that they're going to see is going to be completely different from a physicality and athletic ability. But at the same time, it was nice to see from a focus standpoint, hey, let's try to cut down on some things that we know we can control.
Yeah, North Carolina had a stretch there in the second half where they had gone most of the half with no turnovers, and then had a stretch where they had like 4 in a span of maybe two game minutes, which is a little bit frustrating. But they finished the game with just 11 turnovers on the game, so they cut that down a little bit. 22 assists for a 2-to-1 ratio. Sherrell, going back to that kind of analysis of the post, tell me if you heard this before, but North Carolina likes to get points in the paint through post or penetration. But they did that yesterday, and in spite of a guy like Jalen Washington, who 2 weeks ago was starting, only got about 9 minutes yesterday. Do you feel like Hubert Davis is moving to a more of a post by committee? Do you feel like he's just riding the guy who has the hot hand, or does any of that even matter?
Yeah, I think he has made a decision that Van Allen Lubin gives him the best chance to win. That's because he's a superior rebounder, and I think he's a better position defender than Jalen Washington, even though Washington has shown some proclivity to be a good weak side shot blocker. He's not a primary shot blocker, and I think when you add all that together, plus Lubin has really good hands. I would say on the offensive end, even though a couple went off of him on Saturday, he has really good hands, and he's a decent finisher. I think he's near the top in effective field goal percentage for the team. So add all that together, and I think you see a clear case that he has earned the job over Jalen Washington. And then now Washington is, I won't say he'll go back to his role of last year, which was 7 or 8 minutes as a backup center, but it might not be that far away because I think you'll see a lot of maybe not Withers at the 5, but kind of downsizing when Lubin's not in there. And like you said, perhaps James Brown has earned a few minutes. Again, it was against LaSalle, but he did everything that he was supposed to do, and he did it solidly. He didn't really falter. I think he had the one dive layup that he missed, but other than that, he was pretty sound. So I do think we're seeing kind of a permanent change at the 5. I could see Hubert Davis, depending upon how things go, maybe going back to Withers at the 4. But I think that might be matchup dependent. But I do think the 5 job is Van Lubin's moving forward.
Sean, when you have guys like Ty Claude and James Brown who can come in and give you instant energy, I made the comment on social yesterday that I know Ty Claude isn't exactly a stat stuffer, but I know when he goes in, he's going to try to go through some guys when he has the ball, and he is absolutely going to get on the offensive glass. I know that's probably not the statistical production that this team needs from him yet, but when I see him go in yesterday and play 6 minutes but get 5 rebounds and 3 points, I like that trend. I know that's not sustainable over a per 40, but I like that he's instantly jumping off the bench and immediately making a positive impact in a place that North Carolina needs it. And as Sherrell said, same for James Brown. Can you quantify what that might mean for this team moving forward? Is that, if we're going to stay with this maybe TBD, post rotation, is there a way that you think that maybe North Carolina can justify giving more minutes to a Ty Claude, or can you quantify just how important it is that James Brown's instant offense and instant energy from both of those guys?
Well, I think just going back a few games, there was no contribution from the bigs. So I think now you're starting to have more consistency from Van Lubin, who had a strong season at Vanderbilt, obviously on a poor team, but you look at his per minute numbers, and for the most part, they've all significantly improved so far. So I think he has earned more minutes. The team is starting to trust him. So we've talked so many times in the offseason of what does the minute breakdown look like for the players, and now you're starting to see, Van Lubin get that 20 plus. And, I think Jalen Washington with his 8 to 10, I think he's going to be the deciding factor in certain situations of, hey, if he's playing better or showing confidence, I think you can easily see that go up. But to your point, especially this week, Florida and UCLA, I'll bet Ty Claude is going to be playing a lot more, just with his physicality, his age, and his ability to aggressively crash the boards. And then you have James Brown, who I think will be more situational dependent. I mean, I love seeing him get those baskets and do what he did yesterday, but I still think from his lack of strength and youth, that'll be more of a situational dependency. But I do think Ty Claude, with that experience, can definitely crack into those minutes. So Van Lubin will be more the consistent 20, 25, and then Washington will be the one up or down, but then you can almost plug Claude in for 10 to 12 if he's able to continue crashing the glass and finishing shots that he has around the rim.
It's got to be great for a guy like James Brown to get that spam where he can get that confidence too. Sherrell.
And then you have to remember, Joey, you asked about committee. I think once the well-chronicled, let's call them, big guys decided to go elsewhere, in the portal season, and they signed Van Lubin, it was kind of like, okay, this is going to be a committee. Like it has to be, because the strengths of each individual player didn't really, I would say, necessitate being able to be the guy at center by themselves. So I think what we're seeing is just they gave Jalen Washington a shot through, I guess you would say 8 to 10 games, and said, okay, you've been in the system, we like some of the things that you can do, like go earn the job. And as of yet, he hasn't been able to do it. Now, it's not necessarily anything wrong with Jalen Washington. It could just be that he's kind of at a ceiling or he needs some more time. But that's a reason that they got Van Allen because he does solidify the floor. I think is the kind of the language that we used back when he committed. Like he's not gonna take the ceiling higher, but he's just gonna be very solid and steady and kind of give you a baseline of what to expect at that position. And to Sean's point, there were games where they were getting 2 points and 2 rebounds on 1 of 5 shooting from the bigs, and they can't deal with that. So they have to have a kind of basic understanding of what they're going to get, and then you fill in from there. So I think that's why Van Allen Lubin is kind of leading the committee at this point. And I agree that Claude has shown against Carolina in the past that he's very capable of grabbing rebounds against high majors. I think one of the things Sean mentioned when he committed was how high his offensive rebounding percentage was. So, again, that shows a tendency to be able to go, root out defenders, find space, and attack the ball. So that's really what UNC needs the most, and I think that's why you're going to see those minutes fluctuate as it goes forward. And it really is going to be after Lubin, just like what do they need on that particular day. If they need it, that particular player can give it. If not, they'll go to the next guy. So I think that's what we're going to see moving forward.
Sherrell, I mean, you mentioned Claude's offensive rebounding percentage, and right now it's sky high just because of the limited minutes. But you go back to last year, he was number one in the ACC based on just the minute by minute. And you look at UNC, you always wonder, hey, what's UNC going to look like, in the true Hubert Davis system of his bigs without Armando. I think we've seen that offensive rebounding number plummet, where it's been in the 200s across Division I basketball. So the fact, even if you're getting five minutes from him, 8 minutes from him, 10 minutes from him, and you are able to get 2 to 3 extra shots on those offensive possessions, is huge, especially given some of the struggles that RJ has had and others have had from the outside. So, if he's able to continue to produce in limited, or if that continues to extend, I think that'll just be more beneficial, adding another widget into the UNC offensive system.
And see, this kind of analysis is why we are your favorite podcast. I appreciate that, Sean. That's a good nugget. Sherrell, I would also ask, is Jalen Washington's defensive liability also contributing to his limited minutes? Because, again, I still think he struggles with some of his lateral quickness. He does have the ability to block shots, but I do think he's, especially when he's being pulled away from the basket, I do think he's a little bit of a liability. You think that's also contributing to why maybe he's not playing as much?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, the theme for this team, I guess I'll go ahead and talk about it, but, defensive desperation is what UNC, to me, that should be their theme for the rest of the season, because with the big situation and with a player like Washington who still is growing into himself, I know people will see that and hear it as an excuse, but he's still growing into himself. He's just not able to handle some of the pick and roll coverages, some of the drop coverages. It seems like he's always caught in no man's land when he's out on the perimeter, and that's tough. That's something that has to develop. He hasn't played a lot. I think people forget about that. I'm not making excuses for him. That's just a fact that before the season he didn't play a ton. So he's still growing and he's still learning. So I think the defense is definitely a part of it. And again, cyclical, everything starts with the defense. But that's why I think they really have to play defense with a desperation that we haven't seen. Or if we have seen it, we've only seen it in spurts, because they have to overcome some of those deficiencies that they have inside. It's going to have to be like kind of helter-skelter, where Powell and Jackson and Trimble in particular, and I would say Withers as well, those four are just kind of everywhere. They're helping, they're doubling, they're closing out, they're rebounding, they're pushing tempo. Like, those guys are going to have to defend to the point of exhaustion for North Carolina to get where they want to go. And I think that's why you'll see a lot of lineups with those guys in there. And I think that's another reason that Washington, unfortunately, probably won't play as much, to your point, because he's not quite there yet on some of the coverages.
I think it will be something that happens at some point during the season. I want everybody that's watching and listening to this remember us saying this. There will be a game like the UVA game last year where he comes in and absolutely just goes above and beyond what you expect of him, and either keeps Carolina in a game or maybe even wins a game for them. because of what he's able to bring offensively. But to your point, Sherrell, I think is very strong in a sense that, and while he continues to develop on defense, that will probably be a much more of a watermark as to where his offensive minutes are going. Guys, we've gotten 20 minutes into the show tonight on the Coast to Coast without even spending any time talking about Cade Tyson making more threes in the game against LaSalle than he had made all year. I believe he hit 5 against LaSalle, and even had a couple of heat checks in there. But he had only had 4 coming into the game thus far. Sean, you had kind of alluded to getting Cade Tyson going and just getting him some playing time. We all know that shooters need rhythm, and I think what we saw yesterday for the first time is that he hit his first shot. It was a confident shot. His arc, his release, the rhythm was all great. It was one of those things where I think instantly Hubert Davis realized, okay, let's keep him in, because he wasn't just hitting 3-pointers. He was going baseline. He hit a little wraparound under the basket layup. I saw a lot of good things from him yesterday that I think the folks listening and watching this show and the fan base as a whole have just been waiting to see. Now the magic question, can he continue that? And were the things that he did against LaSalle, is that enough of a confidence boost to be able to unlock him? Or do you think it's going to be one of those things where it's just, hey, let's see how the first shot goes and we'll be able to determine whether or not he's going to be good tonight?
A lot to unpack there. So I think we talked a lot about Cade Tyson last week of at least let's see what we've got. There's no Alabamas, there's no Auburns coming up, and we'll talk about Florida. They're a bit of a different beast, but still different than that in terms of athleticism. So, going against LaSalle, that was, say, a mid-major, or not a mid-major, but a mid-tier team in the MVC last year. So that's the type of team he was going against, almost night in, night out. So I think from just that size and athletic standpoint, knew it would be a good opportunity for him to get more shots up. I think also, as a shooter, it's extremely hard. If you're going in and you get one shot, and that's going to determine if you're playing more or you're going to the bench, that's a lot of pressure on that one shot versus, hey, I know I'm going to get a few. That way there's not so much pressure on those first 1 or 2 shots. And I think you saw that with Cade, especially seeing the ball go through the net and knowing, hey, there are going to be more opportunities where if I miss or I pass it up, I'm going to get the ball back. I thought his teammates did look for him, definitely a little more than they had been. I think LaSalle was also playing off in terms of help side, which made it easier to get him the ball. But overall, I think the main thing was getting the confidence in that game. Florida is going to be tough just in terms of that athleticism and strength and being able to close out and not giving him that wind-up time that he did have against LaSalle. But at the same time, having that confidence, I think he can be better utilized in a game like that. And I think most importantly, not going to expect him to score 20 points or 5 threes in a lot of the other top non-conference or ACC games. But even if he's able to be counted on, just consistent minutes and to consistently, hey, he's going to get 1 to 2 threes a game, once again, takes the pressure off of RJ or Trimble if they're misfiring. Here are some points that can be spread around. I think that was really the main challenge coming out of Maui and Alabama was who else can be a scorer, which is also why we've been advocating for Ian Jackson, just because he had been able to bring that ability. But the more people that can score consistently, the better the team will be. So to summarize, it was great to see him, great to see the ball go through the basket. I think his confidence is up. Florida definitely will be a challenge, but at the end of the day, the joy you could see when when a timeout was called and all his teammates were celebrating around him, I think it was probably a big weight off his shoulders just to see 2 go in consistently. That will help, I think, through the rest of December and into ACC play, so he's not just stuck on the bench for the rest of the year.
Sherrell, I want to ask you, just because I don't want to leave this hanging over you. I know what a big deal that Cade Tyson's transfer was for North Carolina. Did you see the things yesterday? Again, 1 game sample, but did you see the things yesterday that you were hoping to see when he announced he was transferring from Belmont?
Yeah, I mean he hit open shots. I mean that's kind of it. Like I wasn't expecting him to ever really take someone off the dribble or really even post up or anything like that. It's just his job is to come in and hit open shots, and like Sean said, that's really tough when you're going from essentially unlimited minutes at Belmont and unlimited shots at Belmont to you might get 7 minutes or 6 minutes at Carolina, and you're probably going to get one shot, and that one shot is going to determine whether you get more. So it is a lot of pressure. I'm sure he's been feeling that pressure, but again, this was the 10th game of the season, and I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here because the season's a third of the season's over. 10 games, that's a third of the season, but also that means there's 22 games left. So it was always going to take some time for him to adjust to ACC play and kind of get used to the athleticism increase that he was going to face. But I think now he's shown it against, I think American was the game that he hit 3 of them. So
that was the other one, yeah.
Yeah, so American and LaSalle, again, 2 mid-major-ish teams that are a little less talented than UNC. And so now it's like, I'm a big listener to the Lebertard show, and Stugat's one of the characters. His whole thing, no matter who it is, when it comes to college football, he's like, do it against Alabama. That's his whole thing. Alabama could be 1-11, and they could have just beaten Georgia by 40. He'll go, do it against Alabama. And that's kind of where it is with Cade Tyson. It's like, okay, you did it against LaSalle. You did it against American. Let's see you go in there and play tough against Florida. You did it against Florida. Okay, let's go see you do it against UCLA. You do it against UCLA. Okay, let's see you do it against Louisville in a few weeks. Like, on and on. So, like, I'm very high on him, but I'm not convinced yet just based on what we saw yesterday. It was a feel-good moment. He definitely needed it. But he's got to continue to be able to at least replicate some of that in games. Again, not expecting 20 points, not expecting 10 points, but if he can come in and hit a 3 and make 2 free throws, that's a good day for Cade Tyson, I think, with the way this UNC team is built.
Yeah, I think that's all fair game, and I don't think you're asking too much of him. I think just the ability to make opponents think that he's going to light them up. Sean, before I come to you, I want to also I'm going to back your point with a question I'm getting ready to ask you. How did you feel when you saw that screen for the screener action that got Cade Tyson to dunk at the end of the first half yesterday? That was some beautiful whiteboard work. Go ahead, Sean.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, for Tyson, between that as well as now a lot of his threes were in the quarter of transition, which I think is a way to find him. I'm still looking for that flare screen on the left side of the court to try to get him an open look. But once again, I think in general, some of those actions and play calls, whether it's for Cade or RJ or others, to get them in good situations, because I did think we saw less dribbling in general this game, and I think if we can continue to see that, especially against a Florida or UCLA, especially UCLA, known for their defense this year, that will just be a good sign going into ACC play. But one last thing on Tyson, I think when we saw Auburn, for instance, he was playing the 4, and at the time they were just targeting him relentlessly to get him in the post. And not that LaSalle had that, but you could see on the defensive side, on the perimeter, they were looking to attack him, and you could see still maybe that lack of agility or not as quick on his feet. But at the same time, he does have length, and I think that did lead to a shot block. He got beat by half a step, but he was able to stay in the play and contest it. And I think that ability to contest will also determine, his ability to stay on the floor. Because unless there's a strong power forward that has skill in the post that they're just going to try to go down to every time, I think, once again, you have to be able to guard your man as well. So between getting your shot off, making shots, and not being a liability on defense, that's going to be the keys to Cade Tyson continuing to get more playing time in these larger games.
And it would help UNC so much if he was able to do it, just because of his size. Like you said, he's tall, he's pretty thickly built, I would say. Like he's a muscular dude, like he's strong. So if he can just give some resistance on the defensive end, again, doesn't have to be a stopper or a defensive player of the year, but just resist and make it tough for guys, and then hit a couple of shots. That really helps North Carolina's rotation. We've talked about how the 4 position has been a problem for them. And if he's able to do that, then I think it helps UNC a ton. And additionally, I think we go back to, it was Crispin who was calling one of UNC's games earlier in the year.
Yeah.
He just kept hammering on the point of like, yo, if you're a 45% shooter, you need to shoot, and you need to shoot a lot. It doesn't matter if it goes in, because the fact that they know you're a good shooter and the fact that they know you're shooting will open up space for everyone else. And that's why it was probably well timed that he had that showing against LaSalle, because now that's a little something extra for Florida to think about when he comes into the game. Maybe that gives Cadeau or Davis or Trimble just that little bit of extra space they need when the defender doesn't want to help off of Tyson from the corner. That gives them that little bit of extra space they need to get to the rim. And I think that is as much as him making shots is just the threat of him making shots. But to be a threat, you have to make a few. So again, another cycle, another system. Um, now that he's made a few, hopefully it'll open up for UNC, and the threat of him will give the guards, penetration lanes.
I also think that, I know that Jalen Withers has struggled at times in his career at North Carolina. But if you're swapping minutes with a guy like Cade Tyson, who is a different player wholly than Jalen Withers is, that may actually make things easier on him if he's coming in for Tyson. They're swapping, because that's a totally different man for a defender to have to account for if you look at both of those two guys and how they play. So who knows? Maybe it makes it easier. Tommy said on the post game that a rising tide raises all ships, and I think he's right. And this is another example of Tyson showing up and starting to get his offense. If it's something that can sustain, it could absolutely help everybody, not just the whole offense, but individual players as well. I think another thing that would help individual players is if they got some more gear from Johnny T-Shirt. Johnny T-Shirt is now in the midst of their 12 days of Christmas, which means they're slashing prices on they're slashing prices on something every day. We've got just 9 shopping days till Christmas, folks, as we're recording this. Do not be the person that gets lame stuff for the Tar Heel in your life. I'm telling you right now, don't be that person. Not when Johnny T-Shirt exists and is a thing. When they are so accessible on East Franklin Street in Chapel Hill or JohnnyT-shirt.com, you can get whatever your favorite Tar Heel wants. Nay, I say needs. Take care of them. It's giving time. Make everybody happy. You'll be happy you did. Johnny T-Shirt, use that extra 10% on the already great prices they have that you'll find the code on the premium message boards. But Johnny T-Shirt, just good folks, great folks. Yes, they are coming out with hoodies to honor the new Tar Heel football coach. They had some running the other day where they were doing a discounted sale, and they're like, hey, buy these hoodies, cut the sleeves off of them. But they've got all kinds of stuff, and they're working to get some Belichick specific stuff on their shelves. I'm sure you will see that very, very soon. We appreciate what Johnny T-Shirt does for this show. We want you guys to appreciate them too. Locally owned and operated, alumni owned and operated, Johnny T-Shirt. Great folks. They support all of Inside Carolina's content. On the video pod, we'll be right back. On audio, we're going to take a break right here, let some national guys drop some ads in. We'll be back with more of the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com. So as we've been talking so far tonight, we have gotten through just about everybody, and I think we've kind of done what we can about LaSalle and North Carolina having the get-right game that they needed. Now, Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan, still with us. Guys, let's look forward to what's coming up this week, because it's not going to be an easy week for the Tar Heels. But by the same token, this is a great opportunity for them to hopefully flush some of the negativity that they've been carrying since Maui and then since what happened at home against Alabama. Sherrell, I'm looking at a Florida team that, they haven't really beaten anyone, but they are undefeated. They score incredibly well. What for you is the most important thing that North Carolina needs to try to figure out before Florida on Tuesday and UCLA and New York on Saturday?
I'll go back to what I said before. I think it's the defensive desperation. It is, with the way they're built, we've seen it. Teams are able to take advantage of them inside. And I think Vinal Lubin, again, is a good floor raiser, but he's still 6'6.5", 6'7". And they're going to face dudes who are 6'10", 6'11", who can just simply shoot over the top of them. So how do you mitigate that? You mitigate that through bumping them off of their spots. You mitigate that through putting length on them from the help side if need be, and trying to recover. You make it difficult for the guards to get them the ball in the post. And then as a team, you collectively crash the boards to finish the possession. So I think for me, it's all about defensive desperation and doing whatever it takes to ensure that North Carolina closes out possessions and that they make other teams work for the shots they get. Because in the games against good teams that they faced this year, I would say Dayton, because Dayton has a great win over Marquette, which really helps UNC. But Dayton, Michigan State, Alabama, Auburn, and Kansas. It was just too easy for 30 to 35 minutes of the game where guys were just going into the paint, and oftentimes it looked like a layup line. So I think they just have to find a way to make it tougher for the opponent to score on the offensive end. And if you do that, then that will fuel the transition. This is why you want these kind of games in Charlotte, because they will be, even though it's a neutral court, it's not a neutral court, but you get the credit for a neutral court win if you were able to win. So, like, this is the model of game that they should be playing out of conference, I think. So, yeah, I just think they just have to be desperate defensively to do whatever it takes to the point of exhaustion in collectively rebounding and then just harassing Florida as much as possible. And the same goes for UCLA, but it might be a little bit different of a game plan. But that same theme, I think, will continue throughout the week, and that's how they have to play.
Yeah, I think that physicality is key. I mean, that's one thing that if you look back and you mentioned the games against Alabama, Michigan State, Dayton to a lesser extent, definitely against Auburn, North Carolina was just absolutely manhandled. Like, just, you know, they were being pushed back. The other team was setting screens. The other team was getting to screens first. The other team was bumping North Carolina off of their routes if they were running curls or you know, running some sort of screen action. And that's where, yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Sherrell. They should absolutely turn that on its head for this coming week, or at least make an attempt to do that, to assert themselves. And I know that's something Hubert Davis's team would like to see. Sean, I'm going to ask you specifically about Florida. I mean, to my eyes, they haven't played anyone, but I see a team that is incredibly efficient offensively. They're seventh in KenPom right now. Not a great tempo team, but not afraid to run. But they do score very, very well. So I'm going to ask you, what are you expecting to see when the Tar Heels lock up against the Gators on Tuesday night?
So one, you know, this week there's a lot of pressure on this week. I don't think it needs to be 2-0, but 1-1 at the very least. But when you look at Florida right now, you know, ranked slightly higher than Alabama in KenPom, but I still think Alabama, just UNC can't compete with an Alabama Auburn. I'm not putting Florida in that group yet, but they're pretty close. And I think for Florida, they're not going to execute at the same elite level that those teams did, but they have size and strength. So you look at their guards in terms of Walter Clayton and Martin coming from FAU, and both, you know, 6'3", 200, you know, 6'3", 195, 6'3", 200, and then you go to the small forward position. You know, now you're looking at 6'4", 6'5", 220. So just from, you know, really the two guards and the wing, there's some legit size and strength on all three of those players. And really the two guards from outside, you know, Florida as a percentage isn't shooting the lights out, but they've been able to hit in double-digit threes the past few games. And Clayton is a guy that makes them go, but Martin is extremely good, as we all saw in the Final Four a few years ago, and he's continued on. But then also when you look at their bigs, you know, their power forward is going 260, and then their center is going, you know, 230, but they both have size and strength. So to me, that's going to be, you know, Alabama was elite at executing, and Florida is elite in size and strength. So to me, that's going to be the biggest thing of focus. But can UNC, you know, how are their guards going to play offensively? Van Allen Lubin had one of his best games against Florida last year with 25 points. Obviously, a little bit of a different makeup, but a lot of me is going to be the guards. If UNC starts out and they're hitting two or three threes in the first half, that's going to be a big, you know, probably a big negative sign of what's to come. So they need to start out hot, start out executing well offensively. We don't want to see what we saw in Maui, where they get down 18 and they're trying to come back in Charlotte. But if they can disrupt Clayton, make him take some tough shots, Florida loves to crash the glass with that size. So if they're boxing out, I think if you're having Trimble with 6 defensive rebounds, you know, Jackson just had 7. He was crashing well. So the guards are going to have to crash well for UNC, and they're going to have to execute offensively because Florida is big, they're tough, and they have some elite players at the guard and wing spots.
Stay here. I want you to back that with a little bit of insight into UCLA, right in your backyard. They've only lost one game this year, which I think is surprising. They've beaten Oregon at Oregon, beat UCLA this past week. And the scary thing about UCLA is they've got the number 4 defensive rating in the country according to KenPom. And again, if you guys haven't picked up, we're a very KenPom heavy show here. But a great defensive team. So North Carolina's going up against two incredibly diverse opponents this week in just a matter of 5 days. Sean, what do you want to say the game plan against UCLA might be?
So UCLA, I mean, they're a pretty interesting team of completely almost remaking their team from last year, which was outside of Bona, was a very soft, unathletic, Euro style, a very un-Mick Cronin type of team. And I think he obviously realized that with a number of losses and style of play that they had to play at UCLA. And they hit the portal hard. So 4 of their current starters are from the portal. Um, and even some of their top 2 bench players actually were starters last year that took a different role. So their team, not great offensively, but as you said, defensively, very much more of a typical Mick Cronin team that's going to get after you. Very aggressive. I think they're number 1 in turnovers forced, as well as top 5 in terms of 3-point percentage against them. So, extremely athletic and dangerous, really in that 3 to 5 spot. So for UNC, the game's going to be slower. It's going to be physical, which we saw a few years ago in the tournament. But once again, it goes to their offensive execution. If they're playing, if they're playing subpar, then it's going to be a slog. But if they are, once again, able to get people in the right positions, if they're able to execute, not at an elite level, but a solid level. I almost put UCLA, even though they're ranked higher, kind of in that Michigan State level, where you need to win those games, which obviously they're 0-1 in that. But Florida's going to be a tougher overall opponent. UCLA is going to be tough as well, just given their defensive ranking. But UNC cannot lose that UCLA game if they have any hopes of making the tournament, in my opinion. So, final thing to add on the UCLA game is just in terms of Bilodeau and Daly are their 4 or 5, who they both added in the portal. They're going to try to attack UNC in the post, especially with Bilodeau, who's pretty proficient both from the left block and right block. They don't shoot the ball well from 3, but they do have some shot makers, and Sebastian Mack is a guy off the bench that can get hot in a hurry. So two very different styles, but UCLA much stronger on the defensive end than they are offensively.
Sherrell, North Carolina playing in MSG against UCLA. Is this the game where RJ goes absolutely nuclear?
Hard to say. I think when we're looking at like when is RJ going to get better, and I know that is kind of a thought process from a lot of people, like when is he going to break out of the slump? And it's like I don't think it's going to happen in one game. I know back in the day that happened for Wayne Ellington, where he was having a rough start to the year and he hit like 8 threes. Marcus Page's senior year, he was struggling, and then they went down to Florida State, and he had a great game, and then went kind of crazy in the NCAA tournament against Indiana. I just don't see it being like one particular game. I think it's going to be kind of step by step. And to RJ's credit, man, yeah, he's not making shots, but a lot of them are really good looks, and that's just there's nothing you can do about that. That's just basketball when you're getting open looks and they're not going in. There's probably a slight component of confidence in there. It's like, man, here we go again. But overall, I think RJ will be fine. He's doing a much better job. I don't know if the numbers bear this out, but just anecdotally in the eye test, he's doing a much better job passing the ball, of distributing this year than he's done in the past. So he's finding ways to help the team overall, even though his shot isn't going. Like, I think he started the game over 4. He had the team's first 4 shots against LaSalle. But I wouldn't say would you say any of them were like
none of them were bad
looks?
shots?
Yeah,
they were in rhythm. They were good
right.
looks. They just didn't go.
Right, and I think he's shown enough over the last 4 years that eventually, at some point, those shots will start falling. It might not be 8 in a game. There might start being, instead of 2 for 8, 2 for 9 from 3, there might be a few more 3 for 8, 3 for 7, 2 for 5, that kind of thing over the course of 5, 6, 7, 8 games. But again, you don't want R.J. Davis playing his best basketball on December 18th anyway. So as long as he continues to improve, that 3-point percentage just starts creeping up. It's kind of time now. It's go time, I would guess you would say. I think he's at 25 or 26%. If he can be, 35, 36 by the end of January, then I think that would have meant that he's starting to progress and get back to where he was. But he's still doing the things he needs to do to help the team. I just think it's just a matter of the shots have to start falling, and I think they will. As long as he keeps getting good looks, I think they'll fall. Now the issue could be if he starts getting frustrated and the good looks that he's getting don't fall, then you start to kind of go off script and start creating tougher looks for yourself, and then you can get in a confidence spiral. So I would say the hope is that the open shots start falling.
Another thing to think about is he's still R.J. Davis. He's still got 4 years of game tape that is absolutely going to make him number one on any other team's scout. And he's still, like Sherrell said, he's contributing in other ways, but other teams are having to key on him. And he's still got the ability to break somebody off the dribble, even if he's not scoring at the clip that I think folks are expecting him to. He's still absolutely contributing, and he's still absolutely a handful for opposing teams to guard. And who knows? He's usually done well in these matchups where it's trading buckets against another team's premier player. So he'll have the chance this week with the bright lights back on again, and we'll see what happens. Guys, something I want to talk about. Something we'll talk about tonight that we haven't really done on this show, but I think I wouldn't be doing my job as a host if I didn't bring it up. But North Carolina hired Bill Belichick to be their next football coach. And before everybody jumps in and says, "Why are we talking about football?" Hear me out. The commitment that North Carolina has made in their hire of Bill Belichick with regard to resources towards football and resources towards football NIL are absolutely related to North Carolina basketball. I think there are still a large section of fans who are just North Carolina basketball only fans, and that's fine. Do you? But I think folks should absolutely recognize and realize that what you saw against Alabama, and some folks have made the comment in the chat tonight, the SEC has absolutely caught and may have lapped the ACC very quickly in how good the basketball is in that conference. And that's all because of the money that they're making off of their football TV rights and their success in football. So I want to bring that up and let's discuss, because Sherrell, what we're seeing is an unprecedented commitment to North Carolina football. But the way that revenue sharing goes and the way that the money from football TV contracts are doled out, help me tell everybody why this is a huge positive for North Carolina in basketball.
Rev share is complicated, and we're all still learning about it. It is essentially, and what we know is NIL, which isn't really NIL, which is pay for play. This is revenue share is the actual pay for play, which will be instituted July 1st. And what it does, it allows via the House settlement, it allows schools to basically pay their I can't believe I was about to say student athletes, pay their players up to a certain amount, and we can't call it a salary cap, so we'll just say a salary limit, up to a salary limit each season. And it's based upon how much revenue comes in. Suffice to say, it's expected to be around $21 to $22 million. And schools, they don't have to go to the full rev share. The $22 million or 21, 22 is the salary limit. Schools don't have to go up to that, but Bubba Cunningham has said many times publicly that UNC will be a full rev share school. And so, in addition to that, schools have to pay previous athletes from this settlement over the course, I can't remember how many years it is, but for a long time, an extremely large amount of money. So there's a new bucket of money over here where you have to pay players. There's another one where you have to pay old players. And then there is still what we would call true NIL, which is commercial NIL, where Joey Powell gets a commercial with Nike and gets paid for his name, image, and likeness for that commercial. So that's kind of how it operates. And all that goes into what we would call like a total player salary pool, I guess you would say. And that's how Carolina competes with other schools who have a ton of money. The issue is that because of the TV contracts that the SEC and the Big Ten specifically have, they can have their rev share, which is going to be the same for everybody. They can have their rev share, they can have their commercial NIL, but then they still have a bunch of money laying around that they can use to hire coaches, hire staff, for facilities, for training, for whatever they want to use it for. And over time, that stuff adds up. And that is the gap that a lot of schools, specifically I would say in the ACC, and the Big 12 are now facing versus the other two power conferences. And you know, it is true that gap is there, but I think it would be reductive to say that is the reason that some of the ACC programs are struggling. Some of them, um, they had misevaluations in their scout. Some of them don't have great coaches. Now you could say, well, the SEC can pay the coaches more. That is true. But then some of it is they choose to operate in a certain manner, and that's how they're going to operate. So I don't think it's necessarily as simple as Alabama had 17 staffers, and because they were able to, provide Nate Oates with a full detailed analytics spreadsheet at halftime of the first half, that's the reason they beat Carolina. No, they beat Carolina because they're a more cohesive unit with better players 1 through 12. That's the reason. Now, if you want to say, they have more money, maybe it's possible. But I think it turns into kind of a loser's lament when you start talking about money and the reason certain things
It
happen.
has some sour grapes.
Yeah,
there's
some sour grapes in it, but there's also truth to it too. So that's kind of what UNC is dealing with. That's what a lot of ACC schools are dealing with, is that gap that is created by the TV revenue. Because when rev share comes, everybody's limited by the same amount.
And what that means long term for North Carolina is that, and I want to also say we are not the best people to talk about this, but I did think we needed to bring it up since it's a basketball show.
I would get Greg on here.
Yeah, well, I was getting ready to point out. Greg Barnes for Inside Carolina is all over this. So if you're just listening to us, go read some of his stuff that he's posted in the last 2 weeks about specifically the House settlement, what revenue share means, and what this commitment to football means financially for North Carolina. I think what you will see is that it might help North Carolina be a more attractive athletic program to be transitioning to another conference potentially. But either way, there is a lot of down the road and down the trough value in North Carolina's football program making this commitment. And I said it a while back. If football wins at North Carolina, everybody eats. So if you're a basketball only fan, you should be kind of happy that North Carolina's made this financial commitment. All right, guys. Speaking of financial commitments, we're going to do our 2 cents before we get out of here tonight. This is brought to you by Congruity and Congruity HR. Matt at Congruity HR can probably tell you what the equivalent of hiring Bill Belichick for your business would be. He's that in tune and that understanding of how Congruity can help your smaller, medium-sized business. And if you don't have the money to go hire a Bill Belichick, well, let Congruity come in and save you some money, and then you might be able to hire your Bill Belichick. Maybe you can save some money and find a way to get into a different conference. Either way, Congruity is your access point to that. Email Matt at Congruity HR. He's going to tell you how they can save you some money. He's going to tell you how they can help you be a better, more efficient business and let them offload your HR benefits, payroll, back office type stuff. Matt at congruityhr.com. It's my Christmas gift to you folks. Don't let it go unused. All right, Sean. Give me one of 2 pennies tonight. What's your 2 cents brought to you by Congruity HR?
I think for me, if they lose the Florida game, it could be a long few days to UCLA. So I think they should beat UCLA, but Florida game is going to be just the strength and physicality issue is a big concern for me, given what Florida brings to the table. So to probably not 1 cent, but more in terms of what I'm watching. Seth Trimble, I assume, will be put on Clayton. So you have your top defensive player on their top offensive player, but how are they going to match up RJ and Cadeau with Richards and Martin? To me, is one thing I'll be watching. Same thing with Drake Powell at the 4. But on the flip side, offensively, we've seen Elliot Cadeau, his 3-point percentage has continued to drop. He doesn't look overly confident when he's taking the 3, but at the same time, the 7-1 assist to turnover ratio. So how can he be efficient, knowing that he's going to be getting that 28, 30 minutes a game? Teams are going to be playing off of him. We haven't really seen the mid-range jumper, but the floater he hit against LaSalle, I liked him taking that shot versus trying to really force the issue at the rim against somebody bigger. So if he can score efficiently and consistently and continue to control the ball, control the pace, especially as other guys are getting more confident with their ability to score off the bench, whether that's Ian Jackson or Cade Tyson or even trying to get Drake or Van Allen Lubin in their right situations. That's going to be a big focus point against Florida, of just being able to get easy baskets and shoot that high percentage versus falling into that that deep rut early on. So how are they going to negate that size and strength? And it has to come from focused effort both on the offensive and defensive end. The connectivity was better against LaSalle. It'll be different against Florida, but if they're forcing a ball handler to his right away from the screen, the help needs to be there, and then that rotation needs to be there as well. And then finally finishing with the guards rebounding a lot. But also excited to see Ian Jackson play in two NBA arenas, because I think he can hopefully have two strong offensive games and put on a show for his hometown crowd in New York, along with R.J. Davis ideally. So big week. If they don't beat Florida, it's not the end of the world. But if they lose both, it could be it could be the end of the world for the season, especially UCLA, a not very gifted offensive team.
Wow, that was sobering thoughts from the left coast from Sean, but I don't disagree with anything you said, and I think that the matchups specifically, let let North Carolina make things easy on themselves for a change. Sherrell, throw me a penny or two, sir, if you don't mind.
Cade Tyson had 23 points on Saturday, so now UNC has had 6 players score 18 or more points in a game this season. So we see that they have proficient scorers. It's just a matter of kind of putting it all together. So that's one. And then the other thing, I'm not going to repeat the question that somebody asked in the chat, but as far as the question you just asked, Joey, about football and everything and how that helps basketball, if there's something that UNC basketball truly, truly wanted, I find it hard to believe that if they went and asked for it, they wouldn't get it. So I will answer that question that way. Because Carolina basketball is still one of the few collegiate programs that operates in the black every year. It is a money maker, and there aren't a lot of schools that have football and basketball programs in the black. So if Carolina basketball wants something, if they want it, they probably will get it.
And I would also say to folks, like, please, if you're a basketball-only fan for North Carolina, I get it. I'm not judging you. But to think that this commitment towards football is bad or is an anti-basketball thing, I'm going to ask you to pump the brakes. Because, again, football wins, everybody eats. Remember that. Sherrell, Sean, appreciate y'all, man. As always, you guys coming here, you make me look good. You keep the people happy. You make this an enjoyable evening every Sunday night when we do this. And we've been lucky enough to do a couple of these live. So, as always, if the schedules keep aligning for Sean out on the West Coast and Sherrell and I here on the East, we'll try to do them live as much as we can. But if not, we'll certainly still make sure you're getting your weekly Coast to Coast podcast in your feeds. Shout out to the almost 200 folks that were joining us live tonight. If you're listening to us later on, make sure you subscribe or make sure you tune into the YouTube channel. You can get those notifications on so that anytime we do a live show, you'll be able to jump in. But we're grateful for everybody who helps make this show happen. John Siegley on the production end, Tommy Ashley, who helps us some of the transcription. We appreciate that too. But Sean, Sherrell, talk to you guys very soon. Have a great week. I'm Joey Powell. We'll catch you next time on the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com.